I have been wondering when I would read this, and I've been sort of hoping I wouldn't have to read this, but I'm going to read it today because I am really concerned about this country. So, this is from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and he's reflecting back on Germany, on folly. And he calls it Of Folly, and this is just a section of it. And this is what he writes. Folly is a more dangerous enemy to the good than evil. One can protest against evil. It can be unmasked, and if need be, prevented by force. Evil always carries the seeds of its own destruction, as it makes people, at the least, uncomfortable. Against folly, we have no defense. Neither protests nor force can touch it. Reasoning is of no use. Facts that contradict personal prejudices can simply be disbelieved. Indeed, the fool can counter by criticizing them. And if they are undeniable, they can just be pushed aside as trivial exceptions. So the fool, as distinct from the scoundrel, is completely self-satisfied. In fact, he can easily become dangerous, as it does not take much to make him aggressive. A fool must therefore be treated more cautiously than a scoundrel. We shall never again try to convince a fool by reason, for it is both useless and dangerous. If we are to deal adequately with folly, we must try to understand its nature. This much is certain, that it is a moral rather than an intellectual defect. There are people who are mentally agile but foolish, and people who are mentally slow but far from foolish, a discovery that we make to our surprise as a result of particular situations. We thus get the impression that folly is likely to be not a congenital defect, but one that is acquired in certain circumstances where people make fools of themselves or allow others to make fools of them. We notice further that this defect is less common in the unsociable and solitary than in individuals or groups that are inclined or condemned to sociability. It seems then that folly is a sociological rather than a psychological problem, and that it is a special form of the operation of historical circumstances on people, a psychological byproduct of definite external factors. If we look more closely, we see that any violent display of power, whether political or religious, produces an outburst of folly in a large part of mankind. Indeed, this seems actually to be a psychological and sociological law. The power of some needs the folly of the others. It is not that certain human capacities, intellectual capacities for instance, become stunted or destroyed, but rather that the upsurge of power makes such an overwhelming impression that men are deprived of their independent judgment and, more or less unconsciously, give up trying to assess the new state of affairs for themselves. The fact that the fool is often stubborn must not mislead us into thinking that he is independent. One feels, in fact, when talking to him, that one is dealing not with the man himself, but with slogans, catchwords, and the like, which have taken hold of him. He is under a spell. He is blinded. His very nature is being misused and exploited. Having thus become a passive instrument, the fool will be capable of any evil, and at the same time incapable of seeing that it is evil. Here lies the danger of a diabolical exploitation that can be do irreparable damage to human beings. But at this point, it is quite clear too that folly can be overcome, not by instruction, but only by an act of liberation. And so we have come to terms with the fact that in the great majority of cases, inward liberation must be preceded by outward liberation, and that until that has taken place, we may as well abandon all attempts to convince the fool. In this state of affairs, we have to realize why it is of no use our trying to find out what the people really think, and why the question is so superfluous for the man who thinks and acts responsibly, but always given these particular circumstances. The Bible's words that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, Psalms 111:10, tell us that a person's inward liberation to live a responsible life with God is the only real cure for folly. But there is some consolation in these thoughts on folly. They in no way justify us in thinking that most people are fools in all circumstances. What will really matter is whether those in power expect more from people's folly than from their wisdom and independence of